The book of Judges outlines a barbaric time in Israel's history. The Israelites have escaped from slavery in Egypt, wandered the desert for 40 years, and at last driven out the occupants of their promised land. They've essentially been a nomadic tribe for decades, and it's been centuries since they've had to manage their own land, their own territory. Now they've got to settle down, and it isn't as easy as it seems. Matters are complicated by ongoing warfare with a neighboring tribe, the Philistines. Now, Israel hasn't got a king yet, or any formal system of political governance beyond the law of the Torah. So out of this chaos, there arise a series of judges, tribal chieftains of a sort, that emerge as leaders in an era of anarchy and war. Samson is one of these so-called judges. Now, some scholars believe that the Samson legend is actually a Jewish adaptation of the Greek Heracles myth. Both of these mythical figures are hyper-muscular, completely ripped, both of them nearly invincible. But whereas Heracles attributed his superhuman strength to his divine ancestry, claiming to be the son of Zeus, Samson believes that his long, flowing hair is the source of his power. But can a man really be measured by the length of his hair?
Our reading today is from Judges 16, verses 4 through 12 and 15 through 22. After this, he fell in love with a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. The lords of the Philistines came to her and said to her, "Coax him and find out what makes his strength so great, and how we may overpower him, so that we may bind him in order to subdue him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver." So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me what makes your strength so great, how you could be bound so that one could subdue you." Samson said to her, "If they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that are not dried out, then I shall become weak and be like anyone else." Then the lords of the Philistines brought her 7 fresh bowstrings that had not dried out, and she bound him with them. While men were lying in wait in an inner chamber, she said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." But he snapped the bowstrings, as a strand of fiber snaps when it touches the fire. So the secret of his strength was not known. Then Delilah said to Samson, "You have mocked me and told me lies. Please tell me how you could be bound." He said to her, "If they bind me with new ropes that have not been used, then I shall become weak and be like anyone else." So Delilah took new ropes and bound him with them, and said to him, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." The men lying in wait were in an inner chamber, but he snapped the ropes off his arms like a thread. Then she said to him, "How can you say, 'I love you,' when your heart is not with me? You have mocked me 3 times now, and have not told me what makes your strength so great." Finally, after she had nagged him with her words day after day and pestered him, he was tired to death. So he told her his whole secret and said to her, "A razor has never come upon my head, for I have been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If my head were shaved, then my strength would leave me. I would become weak and be like anyone else." When Delilah realized that he had told her his whole secret, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, "This time come up, for he has told his whole secret to me." Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money in their hands. She let him fall asleep on her lap, and she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks on his head. He began to weaken, and his strength left him. Then she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." When he awoke from his sleep, he thought, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. So the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes. They brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles, and he ground at the mill in the prison. But the hair on his head began to grow again after it had been shaved. Hear what the Spirit is saying to the church. Amen.
The rain falls hard on Hamon Hill. Most of us just stand there, still as trees, waiting for something to happen. Some wear ponchos or rain slickers, their faces lost in the shadow of their hoods, unrecognizable. I run a hand through my thick tangle of hair, slicking it back with rainwater. There isn't much else I can do. It's getting late, and before long, the moonlight will be casting an eerie glow amidst the fog that's swallowed up the lot of us. I stare ahead at the source of all the attention. The large white van is mercifully still standing upright, if at an impossibly crooked angle. Both wheels on the passenger side have become firmly ensconced in a ditch. I marvel at how perfectly the tires fit in there, like needles in the grooves of an old vinyl record. Our little caravan of 4 or 5 vehicles came to a halt when the van went off the road. We'd taken a wrong turn in the remote backwoods of Kentucky and ended up here on Hamon Hill, a road so narrow and so treacherous that even the local mountain folk whisper its name in fear. After 12 hours on the road, that was how we finally arrived at the small town of Neon. Neon is an old coal mining community of less than 1,000 residents in the southwestern stretch of the Appalachian Mountains. Our senior high youth had come here to work with an agency called Homes Incorporated to build safe and affordable housing in a community where over 40% of the town lives below the poverty line. The place has character, no doubt. Most of the locals are descendants of Scots-Irish immigrants that settled here long before the War of Independence. They're hardy people that have long made do with next to nothing. With their patched overalls and the odd deserter among their pearly whites, people might be tempted to give in to stereotypes. Call them hillbillies or worse. But having met a few of them, I just call them honest, friendly, and tough. People with a strong sense of who they are. Good folk who know how to get things done. Now, I like to think of myself as honest and friendly enough, but I'm not really that tough. And frankly, I'm not the handiest guy to have around when your van ends up in a ditch. I go through the motions, but it's no use. There's really nothing I can contribute here. So I do the only thing I can. I stand there and get wet, scratching my unshaven stubble. I don't belong here, I think to myself. I'm standing in the middle of an empty house in Florida, glaring at the assembly manual for an IKEA bookshelf. The incident in Kentucky won't happen for a few more years, but I'm feeling just as lost, just as helpless here in this moment. It's the first day of my very first work camp, and apparently someone thought it was a good idea to put me in charge of a work site. We've never put a bookshelf together before, one of the girls in the youth group tells me. We were hoping you could lend a hand. After a quick examination of the instructions, I explained the problem. Well, it's no wonder you're having so much trouble, I tell her. These instructions are written in Swedish. You do realize, she replies, that you're holding them upside down. That was my introduction to work camp, an experience that really challenged you to come to grips with your own limitations. Sometimes you exceed your expectations of yourself. Other times you fall flat on your face. To be honest, I don't like all of the things that I've learned about myself in the process. But I still wouldn't trade it for anything. It's taught me a lot about who I am and helped me to accept the things I'm not. It's also taught me a lot about my community. The young people and chaperones from our church that go on these trips are tireless, driven, not afraid to get their hands or the rest of themselves dirty. This year in Kentucky, they trudged through ankle-deep mud while laying the foundations of a new house. They crawled along rooftops like spiders, their safety harnesses trailing behind them like threads of web. They got covered in paint, sawdust, fiberglass, and sweat. They tore down an entire condemned house with nothing but a few crowbars and sledgehammers. I met a local kid down there on the work site who was especially tireless. He was kind of stiff, his manner of speaking almost wooden. His name was Woodrow, I think. And he was all business. I didn't even see him break a sweat. That's an in-joke for the work campers, sorry. Anyway, these kids were tough. But no one is tougher than Samson, this larger-than-life biblical figure. I suspect that even the giant Goliath would cower before his manly physique, his chiseled abs. Samson emerges as a leader in Israel during an ongoing conflict with the Philistines. He's truly a man of his time, a warrior in an age of constant warfare. In spite of his status as a hero of biblical legend, a casual reading of Samson's tale reveals a barbarian, a muscle-bound circus freak of a man who takes what he wants and utterly destroys anyone or anything that gets in his way. His physical strength is monstrous, inhuman. In one of the stories about him, Samson is attacked by a lion while he's walking down the side of the road. Now, whereas most people would cower or flee in terror, Samson doesn't so much as blink. He picks the lion up and rips it in half with his bare hands, like it was made out of tissue paper. There's a great scene in the original Conan the Barbarian film where Arnold Schwarzenegger punches a llama in the face. And that's pretty much Samson in a nutshell. Samson believes that his strength comes from the hair on his head, which he treats like some kind of magical talisman. He declares, "If my head were shaved, then my strength would leave me. I would become weak and be like anyone else." Without his hair, Samson would be weak, like us, like me. Just 2 days after the unfortunate detour on Hamon Hill, I got stranded again, stood there staring at another van stuck in the mud in the middle of nowhere. I've been driving between work sites, taking video footage with my new assistant, Polly, who also helped me to produce the video that you'll see later. And just as an aside, this is the first year that we filmed in full HD, which you'll really get to take advantage of with this television, the best that money could buy in 1989. But I digress. While we were on the road traveling between work sites, I drove over an old rusty pipe and severed the brake fluid line. In what could best be described as an emergency landing, we drifted to a stop off the side of the road in a patch of muddy grass, unable to budge another inch. After finding a phone and calling for help, we walked back to the van to wait, eating the sandwiches that we'd packed for lunch in silence. And as I sat in the van, stuck in the mud, I have to confess that I was feeling just a little bit sorry for myself. The rest of my crew was hard at work building and rehabbing homes, laying the foundations of structures that would literally change people's lives. It was my humble assignment to take pictures, and at the moment I couldn't even do that. For the 100th time, I thought about all of the things that I'd screwed up over the years at work camp. The time in Florida when I tried to cook dinner and dropped a pot of boiling ground beef all over the kitchen floor. The time I stood up in that church in South Carolina and tried to preach with a southern drawl. Somehow saying that it seemed like a good idea at the time just doesn't really cut it. Now, there was also that gallon of gasoline that I spilled in the hallway of that elementary school in St. Louis. And now this, a wrecked van on the side of the road in Kentucky. I realized then that something in my life had to change. I was tired of feeling clumsy and useless. I had to reinvent myself. So I decided to grow a mustache. A few hours later, I shave off the week's worth of stubble and leave a thin, dastardly patch of hair upon my trembling upper lip. I stand face to face with a stranger in the mirror. "Well, hello there," he says. Come dinner time, I stroll into the mess hall like I own the place. I'm feeling positively testosteronific. The kids stop what they're doing as I walk by, stunned by this latest development. And I throw them hard looks as if to say, "You got a problem with this?" The effect is polarizing. The girls won't look at me, and the boys look at me like I'm their hero. For a moment, I worry about what my wife will think if I come home with this thing. "Who cares?" a voice in my head says that isn't my own. "She'll learn to like it." It's the mustache talking, of course, angling for its own self-preservation. Now, there are some guys who can really pull off a good mustache. On some, it looks stately and robust. On others, especially older men, it looks distinguished. But on me, it just kind of made me look like a jerk. It's a thin mustache, hardly grown in, and it lends my whole appearance a sort of untrustworthy veneer. But I don't care, because I feel good, and I relish the bravado that it affords me. I plaster this permanent sneer on my face, daring anyone to make a move. I get it now, Samson. This is what it feels like to be strong. Well, it's clearly absurd to think that a little bit of hair can really change a person. The mustache lent me some machismo of a sort, but it was little more than a disguise, right? A mask to cover up my insecurities. Samson's hair isn't the source of his power. It's a symbol of his identity. You see, Samson is a Nazirite. And the Nazirites were a devout order in ancient Judaism who devoted their very lives as an offering to God. Well, at a glance, Samson appears to be uncivilized, undisciplined, even brutish. There's this other side to him that we seldom see. Nazirites were bound by strict vows. They were forbidden to cut their hair, for instance. And Samson's rigorous commitment to these disciplines paint a portrait of a deeply spiritual man in spite of his bull in the china shop manner. To be a Nazirite is Samson's spiritual practice, his vocation, his identity. It's what God calls him to do, who God calls him to be. It's who he is. And when he lets Delilah cut his hair off, breaking his solemn vow, all of that changes. I know that women often get a bad rap in the Bible, and I would never say this about Eve. But in the tale of Samson, Delilah really does play the temptress. She embodies all of the temptations and pressures that we face in this life to change who we are, to conform to a version of ourselves that we think other people will respect. It's that pressure to take an ill-advised detour from ourselves. The pressure to chase the promotion that you never even wanted, or the pressure to wear normal clothes to cover up your quirky personality. The pressure to belong to every club in school, even the ones you don't like or care about. Quite literally, she even represents the temptation to cut your hair and change your appearance if you think it'll help others accept you. Samson goes down that road. He loses himself. He can't recognize himself in the mirror anymore. But before his story ends, his hair grows back, as bad haircuts always do. He remembers who he is, and then, true to form, Samson tears down an entire building with his bare hands. While our youth were ripping down that house in Kentucky, they wore masks for their own safety. And ironically, the kids who go on these work camp trips often say that it's the one week out of the year, the only week, when they can take off their masks. Forget about all of the expectations that people put on them. Work camp is a place where young people can establish their identity, where they can learn about what they're good at and what they aren't good at. A shocking concept, I know, in this world that demands perfection, that we might not be good at something. It's a place where they can love and affirm each other as they are, as God made them. We had a phenomenal experience with a local church down there in Kentucky, a congregation that invited us to eat and worship with them. Even though it was a very different tradition from our own, there was a real spirit of authenticity in their midst. Sure, it wasn't especially slick or polished, but it was real. We broke bread together. We prayed together. We gathered in the sanctuary and took turns leading music, with some of our group getting up to lead the assembly in song. Ben sang "Down to the River to Pray," the same hymn that we heard earlier this morning. But the best part was that no one had to pretend to be someone else. The masks came off, and it felt like home. About a week after work camp, I'm in the park with my son. I'm sitting on a bench watching my boy charge about the playground, and not for the first time, I marvel at how comfortable he is in his own skin. He's not the least bit self-conscious. He doesn't care who's watching or what they think of him. He throws me a smile, laughs at nothing in particular, and then trips over his own shoes. Like father, like son. As I'm watching him play, I'm absent-mindedly stroking the mustache. I still haven't shaved it off at this point. Another little boy comes up to me. He's probably 5 or 6 years old. "Excuse me," he asks, "are you his dad?" "I sure am," I reply with pride. "Oh, that's good," he says, sounding relieved. "I thought you were a stranger." I hate to admit it, but in a sense, the kid is right. I am a stranger, at least to myself. I don't like what I've become. Also, having realized that my mustache is now frightening small children, I decide it might be a good time for a shave. Time to get back to the guy I was. He's not perfect, but then again, who is? I call my son over and pick him up, holding him close. I hope that he never has to pretend to be someone he's not. "Come on, buddy," I whisper to him. "Let's go home." Amen.
As I look down in you, pray.
I'd just like to invite any of our work campers who are here today and their chaperones to stand and be acknowledged. Now let's break bread together.